The following program was paid for by the friends and partners of WLMB-TV 40 Toledo.
I came into it very sentimentally. Like, I was going to rescue this baby, and he was going to be so needy, and I was going to blah, blah, blah. And I realized very quickly into it that I was the one that God needed to rescue.
Well, I want to welcome you to another episode of Main Street, the fastest half hour on television. I'm Dr. Jamey Schmitz. Of course, I'm joined by my co-host for the past 21 years, Virginia Bossa.
Well, Jamey, today we have a love story. It is one of adoption, and we have an adoptive parents, Keith and Rachel Simpson, and Keith is a pastor over at Holland Free Methodist Church in Holland, Ohio, and we want to welcome you guys, and we are honored to have you here to hear your story.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, I've been the pastor at Holland Free Methodist for almost 14 years. My wife Rachel and I have served there together with our family of 6 children now.
So we have Henry and Ruth and David, May, Rosa, and Alice just came last April. So we're very busy, but it's been good.
Well, you have a beautiful family, as we all can see. What really stirred you to come together and say, hey, we want to be, we want to adopt some children into our family? Pastor, if you'd like to share.
Sure. Well, we really value the sanctity of life, and I remember preaching a sermon one Sunday on that subject, and then we came home and had a conversation about our family.
Quite a while ago. When was that? When did you preach
This
that?
was back in 2007, 2008.
Okay. All right. Gives us some perspective.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful what you preach, don't you?
Well, and
It's life-changing.
Life-changing.
we said, we have more room in our home. What are we doing?
At the time, our 2 oldest were just turned 1 and then probably about 2.5. And we said, well, we've got this big house and baby clothes. Why not just have some more?
Yeah. Now, Pastor Keith came home and he preached that sermon, but he'd done that many years. Come back, preach sermon. But this sermon really changed your life, and he brought that home to you, that message. How did you react when he started talking to you about adoption?
Well, I had actually talked to him about it, I think the whole fall before that.
Oh, so you were kind of working on him beforehand.
Well, it wasn't. It was mutual. I think I had mentioned to him. I said, I think it had been the fall before because he had gone on a mission trip, and I said, just before you go, I'm thinking about this. I said, I know it's bizarre. At the time, our daughter was maybe 6 or 7 months old, so we weren't in a normal position to want to do that. And I thought he would kind of shoot it down, but he's like, oh, okay, we'll think about that. And then this conversation was about 6 months later. Mm-hmm. So it had been on your radar. We had been ruminating over it for a while, but it wasn't, we were busy. We had a baby and a toddler.
And there was a new adoption agency opening up in town, Spirit of Faith Adoptions. Mm-hmm. And the director there, Philip Worster, had reached out to me as an area pastor and just given me some information, and I tucked it away in a file somewhere and went back to that and gave Phil a call.
And now here you are. Well, yeah. Okay, so we've got your reactions to one another. Well, how did your family and friends react?
We had a great support system. My family is very large, and I have cousins who were adopted, and my parents are used to us doing interesting things, and they were all for it. They were fine, as were my in-laws. They're very supportive. Mm-hmm.
Very good. What impact would you say that adoption has had on your family? You've been at it for a while now.
It has shaped our family.
Yeah, it's just it's who it's who we are, and yet it's not something we think about all the time, for sure.
Whether it's our biological family
Absolutely.
or adoptive family, why should you feel any different, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's a beautiful story. I think that shows to the success that your, adopting your family's had for you.
Well, adopting is not something that should be taken lightly. I know that I have family that has adopted, and well, how was it for you guys in the early years? Was it hard? Has it gotten easier?
It's gotten different, I think. At first, the hard part was it was our expectation. It had to change. I came into it very sentimentally. Like, I was going to rescue this baby, and he was going to be so needy, and I was going to blah, blah, blah. And I realized very quickly into it that I was the one that God needed to rescue. And he used that adoption to shape me. And yes, my son did need a family, and that certainly was part of it. He needed care. He needed some things, but it was a very humbling experience because I thought I was going into it. I was good with kids and I liked them, and it was this great thing, and it was a great thing, but it was in a different way than I had imagined in my head.
Our parenting strategies had to change.
Yeah.
We had to develop some new methods and approaches.
Yeah, you need a very large toolbox to parent kids that come from hard places. Not everything works all the time. It's similar to parenting biological children, but you got to be really on your game all the time, and it is a little different. You tweak how you do things.
So what are some common struggles of adopting?
Expectations, or with knowing how to understand a child that comes from a different background and has maybe experienced different things, and being able to communicate and work through that and be patient with ourselves and with our children.
Yeah, it takes a lot. We're expecting a lot of them too. I've often thought of my son that we adopted from Ethiopia. You're pulling him out of a culture, out of a language, out of everything, and dropping him in this family where people are different. And even at 9 and 10 months old, they see that and they feel that. And that was a big adjustment for him. And we always tell him how brave he was because he made it. He made that adjustment, but it was hard for him. And it was hard for us because I was expecting it to go more smoothly. I don't know why. They told us it wasn't going to go smoothly. But
That's probably also part of being young, thinking that we can do everything.
Yes, yeah, because at the time I was, how old were we? I was maybe 25 or so. It just, I was, so yeah, it's changed. Changed us for the better, for sure. But it was hard at first, some of those expectations. I think even being a pastor's family, like you go in thinking, well, we can do this. Then you realize without Christ you can't. You can't do anything well. And so it was just a big learning experience.
Yeah. What are some of the misconceptions that people outside of the two of you had about adoption, and what did people say to you? And you're just like, well, they just have a total misconception about adoption, or maybe things that they were spot right on that even surprised you. But would you flesh that out kind of outside of just the two of you, how people responded to you?
All our adoptions, our children are African American. Our one son is Ethiopian. So we do look different. We stand out, and people look at us.
Because we're a
multi-ethnic family. And I know people that bothers them. To me, I've never been bothered by it. I just think my kids are so cute, and that's why they're looking at them. I'm so proud.
You just love them.
I'm so proud of them, and I think they're beautiful. And I'm like, aren't you jealous? Like, I feel like people should be jealous of me. So I don't. That really doesn't bother me. I know people though who that makes them very uncomfortable. So that's something you got to kind of think about. Are you willing to walk into Walmart and have people just come up and start talking to you? Sometimes people are a little much. I've had situations where people aren't very polite. Not usually in a mean way, but just they want to
maybe ask questions that aren't necessarily appropriate.
Somebody wanted to touch one of my, like they just came up and thought like they were free to touch the baby, which they would not do if I had had a Caucasian baby in my my car, or in the seat of the grocery cart. So that's a little awkward, but you just navigate it. And I think it has made me, I'm a fairly introverted person. It's forced me to talk to people, which has been good for me, especially as a pastor's wife. That's just it's not my nature. And they've really brought me out of my shell, because I've also had very good encounters, because moms at the park will come up to me and say, you know, I really wanted to do that. How'd you do that? And that has happened over and over again. That's awesome. And so that's been really neat.
Have other
experience.
people actually entered into adoption process because they were inspired by your story?
Yeah, we have. That was one of our prayers, really, going into this, since we do have some leadership in the church, and we were hopeful that it would perhaps influence others, which it has. In the last 5 years, we have, and we're not a large church, 150 people on a Sunday, but in the last 5 years, we have seen, I think I just added it up, 13 children adopted in our congregation.
Really?
More than 40 children come through foster care,
awesome.
Among, I think, about 7 families in the congregation that have been foster and adoptive parents. So we are seeing the influence.
Probably in your church, a lot less misconception as rambling around in your hallways there.
Yes,
Right.
and on top of that, it's grown in our family as well. One of my sisters saw me doing it and said, hey, I'm going to do that. She ended up adopting 3 of them. One is actually a relative of my daughter, a sister of hers, a birth sister. They're now cousins, which is a cool story. And then I have 2 nieces who went ahead and have adopted 3 kids between the 2 families. And so, yeah, we've just seen it spread. We're down at the courthouse a lot.
Yeah, for adoptions.
Yeah.
There was one year that I think I was invited to the courthouse 4 or 5 times for
Yes, that's
adoption
fun.
ceremonies.
Yep.
Awesome. That's awesome. Well, you guys have an amazing story. We want to hear more about it. We also want to find out, what are the first steps in the adoption process. So we'll learn about that and more when we come back.
I have learned in a new way
Yeah.
that we are all adopted when we come into the family of God, when we receive Christ into our lives and we experience that forming of a new family.
The mission of Dominion Broadcasting WLMB-TV 40 is to provide Christ-centered television of high technical quality and programming excellence to uplift, unite, educate, challenge, and encourage viewers in a manner consistent with the teachings of God's Word. Won't you join us? Please send your gift today and be a part of the ongoing mission of WLMB-TV 40. Thank you.
WLMB's free monthly program guide keeps you informed about your favorite Christ-centered and family-friendly programming found on WLMB. There's something for the whole family to enjoy, from great Bible teachers to classic family favorites. Plus, you'll find family movies, news from a Christian perspective, local shows Main Street and Pastor's Point, excellent don't-miss documentaries, and much more. Enjoy quality Christian television on WLMB-TV 40 and sign up for your free monthly program guide today.
Now, back to Main Street.
We're here with Keith and Rachel Simpson. They are adoptive parents, and so we've been talking about how adoption has blessed your lives, and so we want to think about how it can bless others as well. What are the first steps in the adoption process?
Well, a decision has to be made as to what type of an adoption you might be interested in, whether a private or a public, also international versus domestic. So you have to start choosing a path in that regard.
And the international adoption is a great option. It is through the years that door is closing. That you still can. There's still some avenues that way, but it's becoming more difficult.
So more people we have found are adopting domestically.
Yeah.
And then you have to choose what kind of an agency would you want to work through, and also are you interested in fostering? Our experience has been with both international and domestic and with foster care, and we always encourage people to understand that if you decide to foster, your goal is to see those children reunified with birth families, not to enter into foster care with the idea that this is for the sole purpose of adoption, but to be open to that as a possibility.
Yeah. So when you decided to become foster parents, was it kind of by, were you surprised by the fact that those children were then placed into your family that you adopted, or did you kind of have the whole idea that you would be helping to get them back, with some of their biological family unit, whether it's their mom or dad or their grandma or grandpa? What was your experience? What was your expectation?
Well, when we began to foster, we were prepared, understanding that our goal was reunification with birth family. And our first, the first child that we fostered for 6 or 7 months, was reunified with birth family, and we celebrated that. And
that's a neat experience. I think people are afraid of that.
Because, it is hard.
Yeah,
it's
you do.
Definitely heartbreaking.
You give you can't have a child in your home without that child feeling like your own, if you're doing foster care correctly.
Sure.
And then you have to give them back. It's it's heartbreaking. And there's parts of my heart that still, for the little boys that we sent home, I should probably just not talk about it right now, because it's hard. It's hard to think about. They were my boys, and I don't see them anymore. But it can be a really neat experience. We have, I have a friend who, she did a reunification and actually made a connection with that birth mom, and the birth mom actually helped her out with her next foster child with some hair care issues that she was having. It was a teenager that needed some more work on her hair, and that was a great way that birth parent could actually give back. And so you can see community working together. It doesn't always go the way you want it to, but there's those opportunities where you can really make good connections with birth families, and we try to whenever we can.
Yeah. Do you have any perspective on the difference between going through a Christian adoption agency or a secular adoption agency? Do you have any perspective on that?
One thing we've learned is that there are Christians at work in both public and private agencies, and so the Christian agencies are really well suited to meet the needs of birth parents who are looking for Christian families to have their children adopted into. But as a adoptive family and a fostering family, we have had good experiences with both Christian and secular public agencies.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
So, you've talked about adoption, you've talked about foster care. Tell us, compare and contrast the two.
Adoption is forever. It is the same as giving birth to a baby. I mean, it's a way they come into your family. Once you're in your family, they're in your family exactly the same. Whereas foster care, you love them, but I always think of it as very open-handed. Like today, you're my baby. I remember putting one of our foster babies to bed, and look, he was sleeping in his crib, as cute as could be, and praying over him and just saying, today, you're my baby. I don't know what's happening tomorrow. And that's how it goes. It's just this very open-handed, so you don't have much control over it. And what I have come to realize is that really all parenting is like that. I think we live with an illusion that we control our kids and we shape their destiny. And by doing the foster care, I think Keith and I have learned maybe more quickly than we would have otherwise that that's not true. It's not true for our birth kids. It's not true for the kids we adopted. Yeah. So I think that's one of the lessons I've learned through this, is that none of these kids are mine. They're God's, and I just take care of them. And whether it's for forever or I've had kids for 4 hours come through the house. So it's exciting. I find it adventurous. It was actually kind of hard. Our home is now full. So we did have to give up our license just because we don't have any more room. And it was hard for me because you see God at work and every day. And it's an adventure. You never know what's going to come across your doorstep that day. And so it was a little bit hard to give up. I enjoyed the...
And even though you know that there's so many other kids out there that are looking for homes, you know that you know what God has called you to, but you know you're here today encouraging others to open up their homes as well. So what are some statistics for kids waiting to be adopted or that are currently in foster care?
Yeah, for the state of Ohio, I know that there were as many as 14,000 children in foster care.
That's just Ohio.
Just Ohio. And that was in 2016. Now, the numbers I have seen are that by 2020, they're expecting that to be as much as 18,000 or 20,000.
So the numbers are growing.
Because of the drug problem in our communities and other factors, it's just causing the need to continue to grow. So the need is huge.
So what would you say to someone who is considering adoption then?
Well,
or foster care?
Foster care or adoption, I would say, you know, really think seriously about what you can do. Don't rule yourself out. I have a brother-in-law who's adopted some kids, and one thing he often says to others is, you know, how many people have empty bedrooms in the city of Toledo? How many have more than one empty bedroom? What can you do?
And I think something that we're talking about is that if most of us in our community and in our churches, if you had a child knock on your door and say, I have nowhere to go, you would take them in. You'd give them some dinner. You would try to help them. The part about foster care is once you get that license, that's what happens every day. Well, not every day.
Not every day, but they could call you.
They could call you any day. We've gone to bed. It's 11:30. We get a phone call. We have a little girl down here. Can you please come pick her up? Nobody can take her tonight. Okay. So you start seeing this side of our community of Toledo that you didn't think about before. And I would just, it's real. It really is going on. There's really kids sitting down at the agency waiting for homes. It's not just a sentimental, oh, let's help out. It's really real.
What would you say that God's Word has to say about adoption?
It's a theological concept that I have learned in a new way.
Yeah.
That we are all adopted when we come into the family of God, when we receive Christ into our lives and we experience that forming of a new family.
Yeah.
And also, you know, speaking of biblical connections to adoption, I like to remember that Jesus was adopted. I mean, Joseph kind of adopted him into his life.
He wasn't his biological father,
right?
Yeah.
So that's something cool to have in common with Jesus.
Yeah.
Well, never quite thought about quite that way before, but that's a great way to think about it.
Well, you know, talking about the Bible, you know, and Scripture, you know, how has adoption impacted you guys in your walk with Christ?
It's been very formative, I think, as we reach out to these kids and as I make mistakes along the way. I see God's love for me. I see the way He's adopted me. A huge thing with kids coming from these hard places is attachment. After a child's been through home after home or after they've been in an orphanage, they have a hard time trusting. And it's amazing how that affects even a very, very small infant. We had a 6 weeks old, a baby come into our house. You could feel it. You could feel it in her. She wouldn't.
Just the tension.
She was tight. She wouldn't let you hold her. You try to look at her, she'd start crying and throw her gaze somewhere else. They know very early whether or not they can trust. And as I watch them learn to trust, I think of my own relationship with Christ, of where am I not trusting Him? Where am I trying to take control? A huge issue with these kids is they try to control their world because it's fallen apart. And it creates behaviors and problems. And I start seeing it in myself. Where am I trying to take control and not trusting in God. And so I'm constantly seeing this parallel, and it's very convicting, but also very encouraging because He never gives up on us.
And we also realize how much we need God's grace in our lives as parents and as a family.
Yeah.
It teaches us that lesson every day.
Pastor Keith, are there any resources that you would recommend for our viewers to consider, who are considering adoption or foster care?
One book that we read very early in our adoption journey is called Adopted for Life by Russell Moore, and that was a great introduction for us.
Yeah.
And then I think there's a lot of resources online. Focus on the Family has some great resources there available. They really encourage foster care and adoption.
And there's a lot of resources as far as parenting adopted children and different techniques. And we have come to see, though, is that each child is so unique that a huge resource is prayer. As you look at that child and you say, God, what do they need? What am I? And it has been amazing as you put yourself on that front line. He's answered us. You have to be very intentional and very prayerful, I think, going into it. And there's great resources in the community as well. It's been amazing to me, the team of people that come around you, and I'm thinking specifically of Lucas County Children's Services. You have one small infant, and I'm thinking of one child we had in particular, and by the time we were done, Help Me Grow came into it. They gave us a massage therapist. They gave us an occupational therapist. They were coming out to my house. Wow. They gave us a grant for resources for a child that we adopted. When you know how to tap the resources in the community, which Children's Services really was helpful in helping us understand that. There's a huge support network there. And in some ways that, in retrospect, I wish I had known that when we did our international adoption, because there were some tools that I realize now were in the community that I didn't ever tap, and I regret that because we did okay, but we could have had a lot more support than we did if we had known.
Well, the really great thing is now all of our viewers know everything that your life has given you experience. Rachel, Pastor Keith, thank you for being on Main Street today. Thank you for sharing a part of your story in this very, very important topic of...
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And Keith, before we go, is there a closing comment that you'd like to share with our viewers?
I just would like to say that I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing happening in our area, among churches, among agencies working with foster care and adoption. The partnerships are strengthening, and that is exactly what we need to see. I want to continue to promote that as much as I can.
Very good. Thanks for being with us.
All right. Thank you both for sharing your story and sharing your hearts. And thank you for joining us today on Main Street. We hope that you are inspired and challenged. And be sure to join us next week for another great episode.
We hope that Main Street has been a blessing to you today. Please feel free to contact the following to learn more about the topics discussed on today's show. WLMB would like to thank all the faithful supporters of WLMB that make this program possible. Main Street is a production of WLMB-TV 40 in Toledo. All rights reserved.